Welcome back to Mr. English Lab. My name is Emma, and I'm here to guide you on your journey to clear, confident, and natural English. If you're new here, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you never miss a lesson. Your support truly helps this channel grow. Alright, take a deep breath, relax, and let's begin today's session. I still remember that morning as if it were held in warm light, the kind of light that makes you feel safe even before you understand why the day feels different. And as I opened my eyes that day, I felt something quiet but strong inside me. Like a soft voice telling me that something was going to shift, something small perhaps, but something true. And as I lay in my bed listening to the world wake up outside my window, the sound of a distant bus engine, the soft footsteps of the neighbor walking his dog, the slow rhythm of early life moving through the street, I felt this gentle pull inside me, a feeling that today I should step a little outside my comfort zone. Just a little, not enough to scare me, but enough to make me curious. And maybe this is why I decided to go on a walk before breakfast, something I never did, something I always told myself I did not have time for. But that morning I felt like time was soft and wide, like it wanted me to stretch myself into it and explore. So I pushed the blanket aside, sat on the edge of my bed, and let my feet feel the cool floor, and I took a deep breath, the kind of breath that feels like the first breath of a new chapter. Even when you do not completely understand what the chapter is about yet, and when I reached for my shoes, I felt this happy nervous energy, like I was about to step into a story without knowing what the story would be. And maybe that is exactly how life teaches us things, not with big announcements or loud moments, but with small feelings that invite us to walk just a little farther than yesterday. And when I opened the door to the quiet morning air, it touched my face like a cool whisper, gentle and fresh, a bit like new beginnings often feel. And as I began to walk down the street, I noticed things I never paid attention to before because I always rushed, always thinking about tasks, schedules, deadlines, all the things that kept my mind busy. But that morning, my mind was soft, open, and I walked slowly, listening to the birds singing from the trees, watching small leaves dance in the light breeze, and I felt like I was walking inside a warm storybook, one where the narrator speaks slowly, clearly, as if guiding a child through the simple beauty of the world. And for the first time in a long time, I listened, truly listened, not only to the sound of the world, but also to the quiet voice inside me, the one that always tried to speak but got lost under all the noise of daily life. And as I walked farther, I reached a small street I usually ignored, a street with old houses and old memories, a street where the pavement had small cracks and the walls had faded paint, but the kind of faded paint that makes a place look peaceful. And I felt something inside me telling me to turn there, so I did, and the moment I stepped onto that old street, it felt like stepping into someone's forgotten story, a story I had never heard but somehow felt close to. And as I walked slowly, observing the stillness, I saw an old bicycle leaning against a fence, covered in a thin layer of dust, as if waiting for someone to return to it. And next to the bicycle, there was a small wooden bench that looked tired but strong, like it had held many moments, many conversations, many people who needed a place to sit for a while. And in that moment something inside me softened even more, and I felt that quiet pull again, the one that whispered, "Stay here a moment, breathe." Here a moment, and I listened, so I sat on the old bench and let the morning speak to me. And as I sat there, something began to change inside me, something gentle but powerful, because for the first time in a long time, I was not rushing toward my day. I was not thinking about what I had to do or what I had forgotten to do. I was not thinking about the future or the past. I was simply there, breathing, observing, living, and I realized how rare this feeling had become, this feeling of simply being alive without pressure, without noise, without expectations. And as I breathed in the quiet air of that forgotten street, I asked myself a question I had not asked in years. When was the last time I listened to my own life carefully? The way you listen to a story that matters. And the truth was, I could not remember, and that realization felt both sad and hopeful, because sadness showed me what I had lost, but hope showed me what I could find again. And as I sat there on the old bench, letting that hope grow inside me, I felt the first spark of a new understanding, a soft, but steady voice inside me saying, if you slow down, life will speak to you, and if you listen, it can guide you. And in that moment, I realized that maybe this morning was not just a morning. Maybe it was an invitation, a gentle invitation to learn how to understand life again, to learn how to hear stories not only from books, but from the world, from people, from small moments, and even from silence. And as I continued to sit there, feeling something warm growing inside me, I saw a small cat walking across the street with the calm confidence only cats seem to have, stopping to stretch, then looking at me with eyes that felt old and wise, and for some reason, that simple moment made me smile, because sometimes the universe sends you a small sign, something simple, something innocent, but it touches you in a way that feels like magic, and I realized that maybe moments like this are always around us, waiting quietly for us to slow down enough to notice them. And as the cat continued its slow walk, disappearing behind a garden gate, I felt ready to continue my own walk, carrying with me this new calmness, this new awareness. And when I stood up from the bench, it felt like standing up from an old chapter of my life, leaving behind stress, noise, and hurry, and stepping into a new way of living, a way of listening. And I took a deep breath and walked farther down the street, feeling the world open itself to me in small, gentle ways, feeling like today was not only a morning walk, but the beginning of a story that would teach me something real. And the funny thing is, I did not have to wait very long, because the moment I turned the next corner, something happened that I did not expect, something small but powerful, something that would change the direction of my day and maybe even the direction of my life, because standing at the end of the street was a stranger, someone I had never seen before, someone who looked lost but calm, someone whose presence felt strange and familiar at the same time. And the moment my eyes met theirs, I felt that soft pull again, the same pull that had guided me out of my bed, down the street, onto the old bench, and now toward this stranger. And I did not know why, but I felt that this person carried a story inside them, a story I needed to hear, and without fully understanding how or why, I stepped forward, ready to listen. When I saw the stranger standing at the end of the street, I felt something inside me pause, not in fear, not in confusion, but in a quiet curiosity, the kind of curiosity that makes you slow down, look a little closer, and listen a little deeper. Because sometimes life places a person in front of you who feels like a message, someone you feel drawn to without understanding the reason. And as I walked closer, I noticed that the stranger was an older man, maybe in his late 60s, with gentle eyes that held a soft brightness, the kind of brightness that comes from years of seeing life not only with open eyes, but with an open heart. And he stood there holding a small canvas bag in his left hand, the way someone holds something important but not heavy. And his right hand was resting on a wooden cane that looked like it had been carved by hand, smooth and simple, but elegant in its own quiet way. And as the morning light touched his face, I noticed deep but kind wrinkles near his eyes, the kind that come from a lifetime of smiling more than worrying. And for a moment we simply looked at each other, two strangers meeting in silence, and that silence did not feel empty. It felt full of possibilities, full of the beginning of something. And when he finally spoke, his voice was calm and warm, like someone who knew how to speak slowly and carefully, as if he understood that every word has a place and every sound can carry meaning. And he said, "Good morning," in a voice that made the words feel like a friendly hand reaching out, and I answered, "Good morning," but my voice sounded a bit softer than usual, almost shy, because there was something about him that made me feel like I was standing in the presence of a story much bigger than the moment we were in. And then he asked me a simple question: "Do you know if this street leads to the old market?" And I told him yes, that the old market was just a few turns away, and I pointed in the direction he needed to go. But instead of leaving right away, he smiled gently and said, "Would you walk with me for a bit? I don't walk very fast, and sometimes it's nice to have company." And for a second, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because the request felt unexpected, like a small invitation from life that I had not prepared for. But then I remembered the calm feeling I had all morning, the soft voice inside me telling me to step a little outside my comfort zone, and I felt that the universe had placed this man in my path for a reason, so I nodded and said, "Sure," and we began to walk together down the quiet street, two strangers moving slowly through the soft morning light, and at first we didn't speak, we just walked, listening to the sound of our footsteps, the sound of the wind brushing against old houses, and the faraway call of a bird singing from a rooftop, and that silence felt peaceful, not strange, not heavy, and I could feel that this man was someone who understood the value of silence. Someone who knew that silence is not the absence of words, but the space where meaning grows, and after a few steps, he looked at me with gentle curiosity and asked, "Do you walk here often?" And I smiled a little and said, "No, this is actually my first time walking this early," and he nodded as if he expected that answer, as if he could see something in me that I had only just begun to see in myself, and then he said something I did not expect. Sometimes life calls us to quiet places so it can teach us something, and I felt his words settle deep inside me like a small seed finding a soft place in the earth, and even though I did not fully understand what he meant, I felt the truth in his voice, and I wanted to hear more, so I asked him lightly, "Does it call you often?" And he laughed. A warm, soft laugh that carried years of stories inside it, and he said, "More than it used to. When I was younger, I rushed everywhere. I thought life was waiting for me somewhere far away, so I kept running toward things. But when you get older, you understand that life is not waiting in the distance, it is waiting in the small moments, the quiet ones, the ones we walk past without noticing when we move too fast." And hearing him say that felt like someone turning on a small lamp inside my mind, illuminating a truth I had always known but never said out loud, and I felt myself breathing a little deeper, walking a little slower, as if his words changed the rhythm of the morning itself, and as we continued walking, he told me that his name was Elias, a name that sounded gentle and wise at the same time, and I told him mine, and he repeated it softly, as if he wanted to keep it safe in his memory, and I felt strangely honored by that, because it is rare to meet someone who treats your name with care. And then he looked ahead at the street unfolding in front of us and said, "This place, it reminds me of a town I used to visit when I was young. A place full of small houses, old windows, and warm mornings like this. I used to walk there with my grandfather. He was the one who taught me how to listen to the world, and I felt my curiosity grow. So I asked him what he meant by listening to the world, and he said, "Most people hear sounds, but they don't listen. Listening means paying attention not only to what is happening around you, but also to what is happening inside you. The world speaks in many ways, through people, through nature, through silence, and sometimes through unexpected moments, and if you learn how to listen, life becomes clearer, softer, and more meaningful." And as he said this, I realized that he was not simply talking about listening with ears, he was talking about listening with the heart, and that idea made something tremble softly inside me, because I knew that I had not been listening to my own life for a long time. And maybe that is why this morning felt different. Maybe this morning was the beginning of learning how to listen again, and as we walked, Elias continued to share small pieces of his life, not in a rushed way, but in the slow, gentle way of someone who speaks only what matters. And he told me that he had traveled to many places when he was younger, always searching for something he could not name, and how, after many years of chasing distant dreams, he finally understood that what he had been searching for was not somewhere far away, but inside the simple moments he had ignored. And as he shared this, I felt his words connecting to something inside me, because even though I had not traveled far, I had spent years running emotionally, mentally, always trying to reach something that felt just out. Had spent years running emotionally, mentally, always trying to reach something that felt just out of reach, something I could not describe, and maybe a story was opening a small window inside me, allowing light to enter a place I had kept closed for too long. And at one moment, he stopped walking, lifted his head slightly, and said, "Listen," and I stood still beside him, a little confused, until I heard it, a soft sound in the distance, the faint music of a violin drifting through the morning air, gentle, slow, warm, as if someone was practicing near an open window, and the sound was not perfect. It had small mistakes, small hesitations, but that made it even more beautiful, because it felt real, honest, alive. And Elias smiled and said, "Do you hear that? That is someone learning, someone trying, someone expressing something with courage." And as I listened to that imperfect but beautiful melody, something inside me stretched open, and I realized how many small beautiful things I had been missing every day. Not because they were not there, but because I was not listening, not paying attention, not allowing myself to be present. And as the music continued, Elias said softly, almost like a whisper, "Every day has a story to tell. Most people never hear it. But those who listen, truly listen, they begin to understand life in a different way." And those words stayed with me, sitting quietly inside my chest, and I knew, in that moment, that meeting Elias was not an accident. It was part of the story this morning wanted to teach me, and as we continued walking toward the old market, I felt that something inside me was slowly waking up, as if the morning, the cat, the forgotten street, and now this stranger were all guiding me toward a deeper understanding of myself, and I did not know yet what the lesson would be, but I felt ready to learn it. As we moved closer to the old market, the soft violin music faded behind us like a gentle memory, and the air began to change slightly, carrying the distant scent of fresh bread, roasted nuts, and morning fruit. The kind of smells that make you feel warm inside even before you see where they come from. And Elias walked slowly beside me, his steps steady but unhurried, as if he had mastered the art of walking with presence. And the more time I spent with him, the more I realized that he was not like most people I met, because most people speak quickly, move quickly, think quickly, and live quickly. But he moved with the calmness of someone who had learned the value of slowness, the value of breathing before reacting, of observing before assuming, of listening before speaking, and something inside me wanted to understand how he became this way. So I asked him softly, "Were you always calm like this?" And he smiled with a small hint of mischief, as if the question reminded him of an old memory he was both amused by and proud of, and he said, "No, no, not at all. I used to be impatient. I wanted answers immediately, wanted things to happen fast, wanted life to move at the speed of my thoughts. But the world taught me slowly that rushing only makes you miss the lessons hidden in the journey, and that idea stayed with me, moving through my mind like a small gentle breeze, because I realized how often I rushed without even thinking, rushing through conversations, through mornings, through decisions, through dreams, always feeling like I was chasing something I could not clearly see, and walking beside him made me wonder what I had missed in all my rushing, what lessons I had walked past, what moments I had ignored. And then he added, "Life doesn't speak loudly. It whispers. And if you run too fast, you outrun the whisper." And those words felt like they touched something old inside me, something tired but hopeful, because deep down I knew exactly what he meant. And as we continued walking, the quiet street began to open into a wider path with more light, and I could see the first signs of the old market, a small colorful banner hanging between two buildings, gently waving in the soft breeze, and a few wooden stalls in the distance, some covered with cloth, some already open, shining with fresh fruit and handmade things. And the closer we got, the more I felt the world waking up around us. But even with all the movement, all the sounds, all the colors, the pace felt gentle, calm, as if this market lived in its own slow rhythm. And Elias paused for a moment as if taking it all in, his eyes shining softly with recognition or perhaps nostalgia, and he said quietly, "Places like this remind people to slow down. Markets are not just for buying things. They are for seeing people, hearing stories, feeling life." And I understood what he meant, because markets are one of the few places where people still talk to each other face to face, laugh together, share small moments that don't appear on schedules or screens. And as we stepped closer, I noticed an elderly woman arranging fresh oranges on a wooden table, moving slowly but carefully, placing each orange like it mattered, and a young boy sweeping the pavement near his father's stall, humming a little tune that rose and fell with his movements, and a man tightening the strings on a bunch of handmade baskets, checking each one with gentle care, and the scene felt alive, warm, honest, and I felt something inside me soften again. And Elias watched me observing all of this and said, "The world becomes bigger when you look closely." And in that sentence, I heard another one of his quiet lessons, one that made me realize how often I lived in a small world inside my head, filled with worries and plans and routines, forgetting how big and full and beautiful the real world was when I actually paid attention. And as we walked deeper into the market, he greeted a few people with small nods and soft smiles, even though he had never been here before. But somehow his presence made people smile back, as if kindness was something that could be felt even without words. And I wondered how he became this kind of person, someone who carried gentle energy with him like a warm light. And I asked him gently, "How did you learn all this? How did you learn to live this way?" And he took a slow breath before answering, the kind of breath someone takes when they are about to speak honestly, and he said, "By losing things and by finding things. Life teaches you through both." And that answer made the air feel heavier for a moment, not in a sad way, but in a meaningful way, because I could feel that behind those simple words, there were stories, deep stories, stories he carried quietly like folded letters inside his heart. Stories he might share when the moment was right, and I wanted to ask more, but I also felt that I should not rush his story, just as he never rushed mine. So I remained quiet, waiting, listening, giving space, and after a moment he continued, "I lost time. I lost people, I lost myself for a while, but in the process of trying to find what I lost, I found something better. I found understanding. And understanding is more powerful than anything I ever chased." And I felt those words sink into me slowly, the way truth often does. And as we walked past a stall filled with bright red apples, he stopped and touched one gently, not to buy it, but to feel its shape, its texture, its cool surface, and he said softly, "Everything in life has a story, even a piece of fruit, but most people never stop long enough to see it." And he placed the apple back in its place with the same gentle care he used with his words, and I realized that he lived with intention, with attention, with presence, and maybe that was what made him feel different, what made him feel wise in a way that was not complicated, but deeply simple. And then something unexpected happened. Something small but powerful, because as we passed a small wooden stall filled with old books, Elias stopped suddenly, his entire body becoming still, as if he had just seen a ghost from his past or found something important that he never expected to find here. And he stepped closer to the stall slowly, almost carefully, and I followed him, unsure but curious, and he reached out his hand toward a thin, worn-out book lying near the corner of the table. A book with a faded green cover and no visible title, and when he touched it, I noticed his hand tremble slightly, not from weakness, but from emotion, and he picked up the book gently, holding it as if it were something fragile, something precious. And I watched his face transform, his expression softening into something deep, something full of memory, and he whispered, "I haven't seen this in years." And in that moment, I understood that this book was not just a book, it was part of his story, a story he had not shared yet, but one that the morning, the walk, and perhaps life itself was now guiding him to open. Elias held the small green book in his hands as if he were holding a forgotten piece of himself, and for a long moment he didn't speak. He just looked at it with eyes that seemed to travel far away, into memories that lived deep inside him. And I stood beside him quietly, sensing that this was not the kind of moment you disturb with questions or noise, and the market around us continued its gentle movement, the soft clatter of baskets, the low chatter of people opening their stalls, the distant call of someone arranging their produce, but somehow all of it felt far away, as if a soft circle of silence had formed around us, creating a small private space for whatever was happening between Elias and that old book. And after a few seconds that felt longer than they were, he opened the book slowly, carefully, and the pages inside were yellowed, thin, fragile, and filled with small handwriting that looked familiar to him, and when he saw the writing, he closed his eyes for a moment, taking a slow breath that sounded like a mixture of sadness and gratitude, and then he whispered, almost too quietly for me to hear, "This was my grandfather's," and those words carried so much weight that I felt them settle in the air between us. Gentle but strong, and I waited silently, knowing that he would speak when he was ready, and he did, slowly, as if each word carried a memory that needed to be placed carefully. "My grandfather used to write little notes in this book, thoughts about life, small lessons, things he learned from the people he met, from the walks we took, from moments that seemed ordinary but felt important to him." And I imagined an older man, walking with a young Elias, observing the world with kind eyes, writing down small truths in a quiet notebook, truths that would one day guide the little boy walking beside him, and I felt a warm softness inside me, a tenderness for a story I had never lived but could somehow feel, and Elias gently turned a page, tracing the lines of handwriting with his finger, and he said, "He used to tell me that life is like a conversation between your heart and the world, and that this book would help me hear that conversation," and his voice grew softer as he added, "But I lost it many years ago. I thought it was gone forever," and he paused, breathing slowly, then said, "And now it finds me here, in this market I've never visited before, on a morning I had no plan for, with someone I only just met," and when he said that, he looked at me with eyes full of meaning, as if he believed this moment had been arranged not by chance, but by something bigger, something quieter, something that guides us when we decide to listen, and he smiled, not a big smile, but a small, grateful one, the kind that comes from deep inside, and he closed the book gently, holding it against his chest for a moment as if to feel its warmth, its history, its whisper, and then he said softly, "I think life wanted me to remember something today." And I felt the truth of that in the air around us, warm and steady, and I asked him, "What do you think it wanted you to remember?" And he looked down at the book again, then at the people around us, the market slowly opening, the soft colors of morning light touching the world gently, and he said that nothing important is ever truly lost. Sometimes it just waits for the right moment to return, and something inside me stirred when I heard that, something I didn't fully understand yet, but felt deeply, because I realized that I, too, had lost things, not physical things, but parts of myself, parts of my calm, parts of my listening, parts of my courage, and maybe, just maybe, this morning was helping me find those parts again, slowly, quietly, gently, just as Elias had found his grandfather's book, and as we stood there in that quiet moment, he opened the book one more time and gently read a short line written in soft handwriting, "Walk slowly. Life speaks softly." And when he read that aloud, it felt as if the words entered the morning air and wrapped around us like a warm blanket, simple but powerful, and I felt something shift inside me again, another small transformation. Another piece of understanding settling into place, and Elias looked at me with a gentle smile and said, "He wrote that when I was your age." I never understood it then. I thought life needed to be loud to be meaningful. But now I see it so clearly, and he closed the book again and said, "Sometimes the quiet moments are the ones that change us the most." And as he said this, I felt the truth of it inside my chest. As if the morning itself had been whispering that message to me from the moment I opened my eyes. And now, through this stranger with a story, the message had become clear, and as we stepped away from the bookstall and continued walking through the market, I noticed that everything around me looked different, not because the world had changed, but because I had begun to see it with new eyes, slower eyes, softer eyes, eyes that could notice the small beauty in simple things, and I realized that this stranger, this quiet man who walked with a cane and spoke with gentle wisdom, had already become part of my story, part of the story I was beginning to understand. And as we approached the center of the market, where the morning sun began to warm the stone pavement, he looked at me and said, "Would you like to hear one more story before we part ways?" And without thinking, without hesitation, I nodded, because I felt that whatever he was about to say next would carry another piece of light, another soft lesson that I was ready to receive. And so we stepped into the warmth of the morning together, ready for the next part of the story, the part that life had quietly prepared for us. We stepped deeper into the old market, and it felt as if we were entering a warm little world wrapped inside the larger world, a place where time slowed down enough for life to breathe, and the sounds around us blended into a gentle melody. The soft thump of crates being set down, the quiet laughter of two friends greeting each other after many days apart, the crisp sound of leaves brushing against one another at a vegetable stall, and somewhere in the distance the echo of a kettle whistling from a small tea cart. And as we walked, the golden morning light touched everything softly, making the fruits glow with bright colors, making the old wood of the market tables shine with a quiet warmth, and making the air feel alive. And Elias walked beside me with the same calm rhythm he carried everywhere, but there was a new softness in his eyes now, maybe because of the book, maybe because of the morning, maybe because life had opened another small door for him. And as we moved through the market, people looked at him with the kind of respect you feel toward someone who walks with quiet dignity, and I found myself matching his pace, slowing my steps, breathing deeper, letting the world speak to me in ways I had never allowed before. And soon we reached a narrow part of the market filled with handmade items, woven baskets, carved wooden spoons, small paintings of the town, colorful scarves hanging like soft waves of fabric above our heads, and the air smelled of cinnamon and warm bread, and the smell pulled my heart in a gentle way, and I could hear soft music coming from a small radio behind one of the stalls, a familiar melody that made the moment feel like a scene from an old film, gentle, warm, nostalgic. And for a moment I felt as if I were watching myself from the outside, walking through this beautiful place with a stranger who felt like a guide sent to teach me something important, and it felt surreal, but also completely natural, as if this morning had always been waiting for me without my knowing. And as we passed a stall filled with tiny hand-painted cups, Elias stopped and said, "Do you know what I like about markets like this?" And I looked at him, curious, and he continued, "People here work with their hands, with patience, with attention. They don't rush. Every item has a story, and the story comes from the person who made it." And he picked up a small wooden carving of a bird, feeling its smooth surface with his fingers, the details carefully shaped, the wings curved gently as if ready to lift, and he said softly, "Someone carved this with love." That love stays in the object, and I watched him put the carving back on the table with the same respect he gave the old green book, and I felt my chest warm at the simplicity and truth of his words, because he made me see that even ordinary things could carry quiet beauty if you slowed down enough to look, and as we walked, he pointed out small details I had never noticed, the way a piece of cloth was stitched with tiny careful threads, the way a bunch of grapes shone with tiny drops of morning dew, the way an old man at a tea stall stirred his cup slowly, as if stirring not only tea but also a memory, and the more I observed, the more the market transformed before my eyes, becoming not just a place to buy things, but a living collection of stories, each connected to a person, a moment, a feeling, and I began to understand more clearly why Elias moved through life the way he did. And then, as we turned a corner near the center of the market, I saw a small crowd gathered near a table, and I could hear a warm voice speaking to them, telling a story that made the listeners smile in a soft, nostalgic way, and Elias smiled when he saw the crowd and said, a storyteller, and his voice carried a quiet joy. The joy of someone who recognizes something familiar, and he added, storytellers keep history alive. They keep hearts alive too, and we walked closer until we could see the man at the center of the small crowd, an old storyteller with silver hair and bright eyes, sitting behind a simple wooden table, holding a cup of warm tea in his hands, and he spoke slowly, using his hands gently to bring the story to life, and his listeners leaned in, not because they couldn't hear him, but because his stories made them forget the world for a moment, and as I watched him, I felt my heart grow still. Because something about the way he spoke reminded me of the feeling I had at the start of the morning, the feeling that life becomes clearer when you listen, and his voice flowed softly through the air like a river, calm and steady. And he told a story about a fisherman who learned patience from the sea, and a child who learned kindness from a stray dog, and a woman who learned courage from a simple act of giving, and as I listened, each story felt like a tiny light being placed inside my mind. One by one, and Elias watched me with a gentle expression, as if he knew exactly what was happening inside me, and when the storyteller finished, the crowd clapped softly, not loudly, because his stories didn't ask for loud applause. They asked for quiet understanding, and when the listeners began to move on, Elias and I approached the table, and the storyteller looked up at us with warm, knowing eyes, and he said to Elias, "It has been a long time since I saw someone walk with such peace." And Elias laughed softly and said, "I'm still learning," and the storyteller nodded as if he already knew that, and then he looked at me and said, "And you are beginning to listen," and his words surprised me, because he had never met me before, and yet somehow he could see inside me, see the small shifts happening in my heart, the soft awakenings inside my thoughts, and I felt a warm embarrassment mixed with a strange joy, because it felt like being seen clearly by someone who understood. And before I could ask him what he meant, he said, "You carry a quiet storm inside you. But storms teach us things too," and his voice was so gentle that his words felt like a soft hand placed on my shoulder, grounding me, calming me, and Elias touched my arm lightly. A simple reassuring gesture that told me it was okay to feel whatever I was feeling, and the storyteller leaned back and took another sip of his tea before saying, "This market hears many stories. Some stories walk through in silence. Others walk through loudly. But the ones that change you the most," he paused and looked at the two of us with a soft smile, "are the ones that arrive unexpectedly," and I felt a chill move down my spine. The good kind, the kind that happens when someone speaks a truth your heart already knows. And I felt that this day, this walk, this meeting with Elias, this moment in front of the storyteller was shaping something inside me, something that would continue to unfold long after the morning ended. After the storyteller's gentle words settled into the air between us, he leaned forward slightly, as if he wanted to share something more, something quieter, something meant only for moments like this, and he said, "When life brings two people together in a place of stories, it is because each has something the other needs to hear." And then he looked at Elias, whose soft smile suggested he understood that truth better than most, and Elias nodded in a humble, almost grateful way, as if accepting a message he had already sensed but was happy to hear spoken aloud. And then the storyteller looked at me again, his eyes warm but sharp in the way old eyes sometimes are, able to see both the present moment and the deeper layers beneath it, and he said, "You walked into this market with questions you haven't spoken yet," and I felt my chest tighten for a moment, not out of fear, but because his words touched something I hadn't even fully admitted to myself, and before I could respond, he raised his hand gently, signaling that I didn't need to speak, and he said, "Questions don't need to be spoken for life to hear them," and those words settled into me like a small truth I knew I would remember for a very long time. And Elias placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, giving me a calm, reassuring presence, and I felt a wave of gratitude for this stranger who somehow made me feel like I wasn't walking alone through my own mind anymore. And after a quiet moment, the storyteller leaned back in his chair, smiling softly as if he had said everything he needed to say, and Elias thanked him with a respectful nod, and the storyteller answered with a simple blessing, "Walk slowly, friends," which felt like an invisible thread tying him to Elias's grandfather and that old handwritten book. And as we stepped away from his stall, the sounds of the market slowly came back into focus, the soft clinking of cups at the tea stall, the easy laughter of two women buying vegetables, the gentle rustle of fabric being folded, and I realized that even though the storyteller's voice had been quiet, it had filled the entire moment with a kind of peaceful strength. And as we continued walking, Elias seemed deep in thought, not troubled, but reflective, like someone letting memories and ideas move through them gently, and I walked beside him, still feeling the warmth of the storyteller's words inside me, turning slowly like a small wheel, and after a while, Elias said softly, "You know, sometimes we meet people who speak to a part of us we haven't met yet," and I knew exactly what he meant, because that man had spoken to something inside me I was only just beginning to discover. And as we moved through the market center, the morning light grew brighter, warming the stone floor beneath our feet, and we came to a stall selling small jars of honey, each one glowing like a piece of captured sunlight, and the woman behind the stall smiled at us with the kind of warmth that made you feel welcome even before she spoke. And Elias stepped closer, picking up one of the jars and turning it slowly in his hands, watching the golden color shift in the light, and the woman said, "This honey comes from the hillside above the river. The bees there are calm. Their honey is gentle," and her voice was soft and musical, and Elias smiled and said, "Calm bees, gentle honey, sounds perfect," and he handed me the jar, and when I held it, I felt its warmth, not just from the sun, but from the sense that nature had created something sweet through a long, patient process. And the woman continued, "Good honey teaches patience. It takes time for sweetness to grow," and I almost laughed at how the universe seemed to be repeating the same message in different forms: patience, stillness, listening, almost as if everything in this market was part of one quiet lesson. And Elias paid for the jar, giving the woman a warm thank you, and she smiled at him the way people smile at someone who brings calm energy into their space. And as we walked away, I asked him softly, "Do you buy honey often?" And he chuckled and said, "Not really, but sometimes I like to take home a small reminder of a moment that feels important. And I looked at the jar in my hands and realized that the honey was not just honey, it was a piece of this morning, sweet and slow and gentle. Something I could carry with me long after we left the market, and as we continued walking. We reached a quieter area on the far side of the market where the stalls were fewer and the voices softer, and the air carried the smell of warm bread drifting from a small bakery just around the corner. And I heard the soft tapping sound of dough being shaped and folded inside, and Elias paused, taking a deep breath, smiling as if the simple smell brought him joy, and he said, "Bread has a special kind of comfort, don't you think? It reminds people of home," and I nodded because there was something grounding about the smell of bread, something that made you feel safe even if you didn't know why, and we stepped closer to the bakery window where we could see an older baker working quietly, shaping dough with practiced hands that moved with both strength and gentleness, and for a moment I imagined how many mornings he had stood in that same spot, doing the same movements, creating something warm for people he might never meet, and I felt a quiet respect for him, for all the small, unnoticed acts of care that people contribute to the world, and Elias said softly, "Some people teach with words, others with stories, and some with the way they work," and as I watched the baker, I understood exactly what he meant, and when we stepped away from the window, the sounds of the market returned, softer now as the first part of the morning began to settle, and I felt a growing calm inside me, as if the walk through the market was not just a walk, but a slow, gentle conversation with life itself, and with every step, every detail, every quiet voice, the world felt a little clearer, a little softer, a little more alive. And I began to understand why Elias had said that markets teach you how to listen. It wasn't just about listening to sounds, but also to moments, to people, to stories, to the quiet messages hidden in ordinary things. And as we reached the last row of stalls, Elias stopped walking, turned to me, with that gentle, wise brightness in his eyes, and said, "There's something I want to show you, just beyond the market." And in that moment, I felt again that soft pull inside me, the one that had guided me since the morning began, a pull that whispered, "Keep going. Follow this story. There is more to learn." And so we stepped away from the warm noise of the market and walked toward whatever waited next in the quiet unfolding of the day. We left the soft buzz of the market behind us, stepping into a quieter path that curved gently between old stone buildings, and the air shifted as we walked, becoming cooler, calmer, and filled with the faint sound of leaves rustling somewhere ahead. And Elias moved with the same slow, steady rhythm he always carried, but there was something different in his expression now, something thoughtful, as if he was guiding me not just to another place, but to another understanding, another layer of this morning's unfolding story. And as we stepped farther away from the market's colorful sounds, I could hear our footsteps brushing softly against the old stone path, and I noticed how the world seemed to grow quieter with each step, like someone slowly turning down the volume of everything except the present moment. And after a while, the narrow path opened into a small open space at the edge of a hill, a place I had never seen before, hidden behind the market like a quiet secret, and the view made me pause, because right in front of us was a row of tall trees swaying gently in the wind, their leaves shimmering with morning light, and beyond them lay the slow curve of a river, calm and silver blue, flowing softly as if it too were breathing with the rhythm of the day. And Elias stopped at the top of the hill, leaning slightly on his cane, and he took a long, deep breath, closing his eyes for a brief moment, letting the calm air settle into him. And when he opened his eyes again, he said, This is where I come when I need to remember what matters." And there was a softness in his voice, the softness of someone who had stood in this place many times, perhaps during moments of confusion, sadness, hope, or quiet reflection. And he looked at me with a gentle smile and added, "I found this place years ago, by accident, just like you found this morning," and his words settled inside me with a quiet truth, because nothing about this day had been planned, and yet every moment felt strangely meant, as if the morning had been waiting to guide me, soft step by soft step, toward this very hill, this very view, and I stood beside him, breathing in the cool air, watching the way sunlight touched the river, turning it into a smooth sheet of light that shifted like a gentle heartbeat, and Elias pointed toward a small wooden bench beneath one of the tall trees, a bench that looked simple but strong, weathered by time, touched by countless seasons of sun and rain, and he said, "Let's sit for a moment," and we walked to the bench slowly and sat down, feeling the cool wood beneath us, and for a while we didn't speak at all. We simply sat there listening to the soft movements of the world, the wind brushing through the leaves above us, the distant sound of a bird calling to another, the gentle flow of the river, steady and calm, and I felt my entire body relax in a way it hadn't in a long time, as if the quiet around us gave permission for the quiet inside me to rise to the surface. And after a long, peaceful silence, Elias spoke softly. "When I was younger, I used to think that peace was something you had to find in big moments, big achievements, big changes, but life taught me something different." And I turned toward him slightly, listening carefully, knowing that whatever he was about to say would hold another piece of his gentle wisdom, and he continued, "Peace is not something you find. Peace is something you allow," and I let those words sit inside me, letting them echo in the quiet space of my thoughts, and the more I repeated them silently, the more they made sense. Because I realized how much effort I had spent in my life looking for peace in the wrong places, in accomplishments, in new plans, in future moments that never arrived the way I expected. And hearing Elias say that peace is something you allow felt like someone opening a door I didn't know was locked, and he added, "Most people carry so much noise inside themselves that when the world becomes quiet, they feel uncomfortable. They think something is missing, but really, silence is where you meet yourself." And as he said this, I looked out at the river again, feeling the truth of his words resonate with the quiet in front of me, and I realized how rarely I allowed myself to sit in silence without reaching for my phone, without planning my next steps, without filling the moment with thoughts that rushed faster than my breath. And Elias must have sensed what I was feeling, because he placed his hand softly on the bench, close to mine, not touching, but offering a presence, and he said, "You're learning to listen today, not to me, not to the market, not to the world, but to yourself." And his words made something inside my chest warm and tremble at the same time, because they were true. This whole morning had been guiding me toward listening, toward noticing the quiet voice inside me that had been drowned out by the noise of daily life. And the longer we sat on that bench, the more I felt that I was not just observing the world, I was connecting with its softness, its slowness, its gentle wisdom. And after a while, Elias reached into his pocket and took out the little green book again, the one he had found in the market, and he held it loosely in his hands, turning it gently, and he said, "This book taught me how to listen when I was younger, and I think it came back today for a reason." And he opened it to a page near the center, one filled with more of his grandfather's small, careful writing, and he read aloud in a soft, steady voice, "Sometimes the world teaches you through people, sometimes through places, and sometimes through mornings that feel like whispers." And when he read that line, I felt a deep, quiet ripple through me, because it described exactly what this day felt like, a whisper, a soft lesson from life that arrived gently but meaningfully. And Elias looked at me with eyes full of gentle understanding and said, "This morning will stay with you, not because it was special, but because you were present enough to feel it." And those words felt like a warm hand tightening gently around my heart. reminding me that experiences don't become meaningful by chance. They become meaningful when we choose to be present for them. And as we sat there, letting the quiet morning hold us, the wind softened, the sunlight grew warmer, and the world felt steady and safe, and I understood, in a way I hadn't understood before, that sometimes the most important moments in life are the ones that ask nothing from you except that you slow down, breathe, and listen. And after what felt like a long, peaceful pause, Elias stood up slowly, resting his cane on the ground, and said, "Come, there's still more to see. This morning isn't finished with us yet." And I rose from the bench with a calmness I hadn't felt in months, maybe years, ready to follow him further into the quiet unfolding of this unexpected, beautiful day. We walked down the gentle slope of the hill, leaving the peaceful bench and the soft sound of the river behind us, and as we stepped onto a narrow dirt path that curved through a small patch of trees, I felt the morning begin to change in a quiet, subtle way, like the world was preparing for a shift. And even though the sky was still bright, a calm heaviness rested in the air, the kind that often comes before a storm, and Elias seemed to notice it too, because he paused for a moment, looked up at the clouds gathering slowly in the distance, and said softly, "The weather is changing, but that's all right. Storms have their own lessons," and he said it not with worry, but with a calm acceptance, as if storms were simply another part of living, something to walk through with steady steps instead of fear. And as we continued down the path, the wind began to rise, brushing through the tall grass that lined both sides of the trail, making the blades sway like soft green waves, and the leaves of the trees rustled in a deeper, fuller sound, like the wind had suddenly found a stronger voice. And I felt a coolness touch my skin, not unpleasant but surprising after the warmth of the morning, and the sky began to shift from clear blue to a pale silver gray that grew heavier and more textured with each minute. And even though the air changed, there was something strangely beautiful about it, something cinematic and alive, like the world was getting ready to show a different side of itself. And Elias walked with the same calm rhythm as before, his step sure and steady, and I found myself matching his pace again, trusting his sense of direction, trusting the quiet wisdom he carried in his presence. And we made our way through the trees until the path opened into a wide open field where the wind moved freely, carrying the scent of rain that had not yet fallen but was already on its way. And the field stretched out in front of us with tall grasses bending gently to the growing wind, and a row of distant hills framed the horizon, their outlines soft against the changing sky. And Elias pointed toward a small cabin near the far side of the field, an old wooden structure with a slanted roof and a stone chimney, and he said, "We can take shelter there if the storm reaches us." But he didn't sound rushed, only thoughtful, as if the storm was simply another part of the story, not a danger but a moment to experience. And we began walking across the field, the wind growing stronger, tugging at our clothes and brushing against our faces in cool bursts, and I could feel the first hints of excitement inside me, mixed with a small spark of nervousness, because I had always avoided storms, always run from them, always chosen the safe, predictable path indoors. But here, walking through the open field with Elias beside me, I didn't feel afraid, only aware, alive, present. And the sky deepened into a darker gray, and a low distant rumble rolled across the hills like a slow awakening of the clouds, grounding, reminding me that nature moves just like people do, with calm moments, loud moments, soft breaths, and sudden emotions. And as we walked, I felt a few cool drops of rain touch my skin, light at first, like tiny taps asking for attention. And Elias lifted his face toward the sky, letting the raindrops fall on him without flinching, and he said softly, almost to himself, "Let it come." And then the rain began to fall a little faster, Not heavy yet, but steady, the kind that makes the world smell fresh and clean, and the sound of the raindrops hitting the field around us became a soft, whispering blanket of sound that wrapped around the moment, and I found myself breathing deeper, my senses waking up in a new way I hadn't expected. And as the rain grew stronger, I looked toward the cabin again, now closer, but still a few minutes away, and we kept walking with calm, steady steps, not hurrying, just moving forward, and the sky opened a little more, letting down another layer of rain, cool and gentle at first, then slowly stronger, and I felt a strange mix of peace and energy inside me, as if the storm was not something happening outside, but something echoing inside, shaking loose old feelings, old fears, old thoughts I had been carrying for a long time without even noticing. And Elias walked beside me with the same peaceful expression, his hair damp, his clothes growing darker with the rain, but his eyes still bright and calm, and he said softly, "Most people only see storms as trouble, but storms also wash away things we don't need anymore." And as he said that, a sudden gust of wind rushed across the field, sending the tall grasses bending low and making the rain fall sideways for a moment. And I felt the full force of the wind against me, strong but not frightening, more like a powerful breath from the sky, and Elias placed a steadying hand on my arm for a moment, not because he thought I would fall, but because storms feel easier when someone is walking with you. And we moved forward step by step until the cabin stood only a few meters away, and the rain had become heavier now, falling in firm streaks that drummed gently on the cabin roof, and we reached the small wooden door, which Elias pushed open with a soft creak, and inside the cabin was dim but warm in a natural way, with wooden walls that smelled faintly of old pine and a small window that let in the gray light of the storm, and the air inside felt still and safe, as if the cabin had held many storms before this one, offering shelter to anyone who stepped inside. And Elias closed the door behind us, leaving the sound of the storm outside as a soft, steady rhythm on the roof, and he walked to a small wooden chair near the window and sat down slowly, resting his cane beside him, while I stood near the center of the room, feeling my breath settle, feeling the lingering echo of the wind still in my chest. And after a long, gentle silence filled the cabin, broken only by the soft roar of the rain outside, Elias looked at me with an expression full of understanding and said, "Everyone has a storm inside them. Today you listen to yours." And in that quiet moment, with the storm surrounding the cabin and the room holding us in calm stillness, I realized he was right. I had felt something shift inside me when the storm approached, something open, something release, something soften, and I knew this storm was not just weather, it was a teacher, a mirror, a moment meant to show me something about myself that I had never slowed down enough to see. The cabin felt like a quiet pocket of time, a small wooden world where everything slowed down just enough for thoughts to rise to the surface. And as the storm moved outside with its steady drumbeat of rain and soft rolling thunder, I walked toward the window and watched the raindrops race down the glass, each drop leaving a clear trail behind it before joining the next, and I felt the same thing happening inside me, old thoughts sliding away, making room for new clarity that I didn't even know I needed. And the sky outside had grown a deep silver, heavy but beautiful, the kind of sky that makes the world look softer and more honest, and the field beyond the cabin had become a sea of moving water, each blade of grass bending, swaying, breathing with the rhythm of the storm. And for a long moment I simply watched, feeling my own breath fall into the same slow rhythm. And behind me, Elias shifted gently in the wooden chair, the soft creak of the old wood blending with the rain like a natural part of the storm's music. And after a while he said quietly, "Storms make us listen, even when we think we don't want to." And his voice was low, warm, thoughtful, the kind of voice that felt like a blanket around a tired mind. And I turned to him and asked softly, "What did storms teach you?" And for a moment he didn't answer. He just looked at the floor with a soft smile, like someone remembering something far away but still close to the heart, and then he said, "When I was younger, I ran from storms. I thought they were signs of trouble, signs of danger, but one day, when I was about your age, I got caught in a storm just like this one," and he gestured lightly toward the window, and I sat on the floor across from him, listening, feeling the cabin grow even quieter as he began to share something deeper, and he continued, "I was upset that day, angry at life, angry at myself, angry at how things were going. I thought the storm made everything worse. I thought it came at the worst time. But as I walked through it, something strange happened. I felt my anger loosen. The wind pushed against me, the rain washed over me, and by the time I found shelter, I realized that the storm hadn't come to break me. It came to clean me, and those last words made something inside me tremble gently because I knew exactly what he meant. And I looked back at the rain sliding down the window and saw it differently now, not as something frightening or inconvenient, but as something calming, something honest, something that reminded the world to let go. And after a moment of quiet reflection, I whispered, "I think I've been carrying a storm inside me too," and Elias nodded gently, as if he had known that long before I said it, and he replied, "Everyone carries storms. Some hold them for years without knowing. Some hide them behind busy days. Some pretend they're fine until the noise inside grows too loud. But storms don't hurt us. Resisting them does," and as his words settled inside me, the rain outside grew heavier, falling in powerful waves that hit the roof with a firm, steady rhythm, and yet the cabin felt safe, warm, sheltered, and I realized how true his words were when I resisted my own feelings, my own fears, my own uncertainties. They only grew more powerful, more confusing, more overwhelming, but whenever I allowed them to exist, even for a moment, they softened, changed shape, became clearer, and I felt something inside me open like a small door I hadn't noticed before, and I said quietly, "I didn't know how heavy I felt until now," and Elias smiled with deep understanding, the kind of smile that made you feel seen without being judged, and he said, "That's the thing about storms, they show us the weight we've been carrying, because they shake things loose," and he leaned back slightly in his chair, listening to the soft rumble of thunder in the distance, and he added, "But storms also pass, always," and there was such gentle certainty in his voice that I felt a wave of comfort wash over me, and I realized how much fear I had quietly carried about things in my life not changing, not getting better, not shifting in the way I hoped, and hearing that storms always pass felt like being given permission to hope again. And the storm outside began to move in a new rhythm, the rain coming in softer pulses now, each drop hitting the roof more gently than before, and the thunder grew a little more distant, rolling softly across the sky like someone closing a door slowly instead of slamming it, and Elias tapped his fingers lightly on the side of the chair, watching the window with thoughtful eyes, and he said, "Listen, do you hear it?" And at first I only heard the rain, but then I noticed something beneath it, a soft, quiet space, like a pause between breaths, a peace beginning to return to the world, and I nodded, and Elias said, "That's what it feels like inside us too, after the storm passes," and I let his words sit inside me for a long moment as the rain softened even more, becoming a delicate pattern rather than a heavy rhythm, and the cabin filled with a gentle, golden gray light as the clouds began to thin, letting a small hint of sun seep through. And I felt my whole body relax in a way that felt new, light, and deep, and Elias reached for the little green book on the small table beside him, opening it to another handwritten page, and he read aloud, "When the sky breaks open, Let your heart break open too, because both were made to heal. And as he closed the book, the softest smile touched his face, and he whispered, "My grandfather wrote that after a storm that changed him." And I looked back out the window, feeling the truth of those words blend with the sight of the softening rain. And I realized then that this storm, this moment, this morning, this quiet cabin was changing me too, not loudly, not suddenly, but gently, deeply, quietly, and as the last few drops of rain slid down the glass, I felt something inside me settle, soften, and fall into place, like the world had helped me breathe again. And I knew this storm, like the market, like the river, like Elias himself, would stay with me long after the day ended. After the rain finally slowed to a soft drizzle, Elias and I stayed seated near the window for a while longer, simply listening to the quiet world beyond the cabin, and the field looked washed clean, the grass sparkling with tiny droplets, and the sky had taken on a calm, pale silver blue that felt like the world was breathing again. And I noticed how the air smelled fresher, softer, almost alive, carrying a new energy that wasn't there before the storm. And Elias leaned back in his chair with a relaxed smile, looking around the small cabin as if appreciating it for more than just shelter. And then he said softly, "You see, storms aren't meant to frighten us. They're meant to remind us of our strength, of our ability to weather whatever comes." And I nodded slowly, understanding the truth in his words, because I could feel the calm inside me now. A calm that had grown from allowing the storm to pass through rather than fighting it. And he added, "Sometimes we avoid storms because we fear the unknown, the discomfort, the chaos, but every storm carries a gift, if you're willing to see it." And I thought about the day so far, the market, the storyteller, the quiet bench by the river, the rain, and I realized how each moment had been teaching me the same lesson in different ways: to slow down, to listen, to be present, to allow life to move through me without resistance. And I looked down at my hands, feeling the small traces of rain that had fallen on me, and it occurred to me that even in our smallest experiences, there is a rhythm, a pattern, a message waiting to be understood if only we pay attention. And Elias stood slowly, resting his hand lightly on the back of the chair, and he said, "Shall we step outside? The storm has passed, but the world is awake in a new way." And I followed him to the cabin door, opening it to the fresh, clean air, feeling the soft drizzle on my skin, the smell of wet grass and earth rising around me, and the field stretched before us, alive and shimmering, each blade of grass glistening, each drop of water reflecting the gentle light. And the distant hills now held the softness of a world renewed, quiet and waiting. And Elias walked forward with his steady calm, and I followed, noticing for the first time how much more vivid the world felt after the storm, how alive every color, every sound, every scent had become. And we reached a small cluster of trees at the edge of the field, where the wind had calmed and the sun began to peek through the clouds, casting long, soft shadows on the wet ground. And Elias paused, looking up at the sky with a reflective smile, and he said, "The world shows you what you are ready to see. Sometimes it comes in quiet moments. Sometimes it comes in storms." And I felt the truth of that in my chest, a gentle weight of understanding. And I realized that the storm had not only passed around us, but also within us, that it had washed away fear, worry, and heaviness, and replaced them with clarity, calm, and a renewed sense of presence. And as I looked at Elias beside me, his face calm and steady, I felt a deep gratitude for this morning, for the journey, for the quiet lessons hidden in the storm. And I knew that from now on, I would meet storms differently, not as something to fear or escape, but as something to experience, something to allow, something that could teach, remind, and renew. And as the last light of the sun touched the field, turning every drop of water into a tiny shining gem. Continue our story. I smiled softly, feeling that same calm settle into my bones. The storm had left us not broken, but whole, and walking back across the field toward the path that would take us home, I carried a quiet certainty in my heart. Storms are not obstacles. They are teachers, mirrors, friends, and guides, and when we allow them, when we listen, we emerge renewed, alive, and ready to. After leaving the cabin and stepping back onto the soft path, Elias guided me through a small forest that bordered the field, and the air smelled of damp earth and fresh leaves, sweet and alive, carrying the soft hint of flowers that had survived the storm. And as we walked, I noticed how every tree and every blade of grass seemed more vivid, as if the world itself had paused, breathed, and awakened. And Elias walked slowly, steadily, his cane tapping lightly on the wet ground, each step deliberate and calm, and I realized that his pace was teaching me something important, something about slowing down, noticing, being present, not hurrying past moments that could quietly shape you if only you paid attention. And after a while, he stopped in front of a narrow, overgrown path, hidden behind a thick curtain of bushes and flowering vines, and he smiled softly, as if sharing a secret, and said, "This is the garden." And I could feel my heart beat a little faster, not out of excitement alone, but out of curiosity, because it felt like we were about to enter a space removed from ordinary time, a place where life moved at its own pace, where everything grew slowly and with purpose. And I looked at him and whispered, "It's hidden," and he nodded gently, saying, "Some of the most important things are hidden. You just have to have patience to find them." And I felt the truth in his words settle quietly inside me, because so much of life feels immediate, urgent, fast-moving. But here, in this quiet forest, something felt different. Like time had been asked to slow down for those willing to notice, and we stepped through the narrow opening, brushing aside vines and leaves, and I felt the air change again, warmer, richer, scented with wet soil and blooming flowers. And as we entered the garden, I could see that it was small but alive with color, with tiny blossoms of every hue, some drooping slightly from the rain, some standing tall, resilient and bright, and the ground was soft, uneven, and earthy, and the faint hum of bees drifted lazily through the air, working patiently from flower to flower. And I looked at Elias and said softly, "It's beautiful, like it's waiting for something." And he smiled, the kind of smile that carries gentle understanding, and he said, "Yes, it waits for patience. Life, like this garden, needs time, care, and attention to grow into its fullness." And I nodded slowly, taking in the details, the way the sunlight filtered through the trees, making patterns on the soft soil, the way the flowers seemed to stretch toward the light, the way the garden breathed quietly around us. And I realized that the garden itself was a teacher, showing the same lesson that the market, the river, and the storm had whispered to me: patience, presence, and gentle attention are what allow life to reveal its sweetness, its beauty, its clarity. And as we walked along the narrow dirt path, Elias paused beside a small patch of budding flowers, reaching down to brush a single raindrop from a delicate petal, and he said softly, "See these flowers? They don't rush. They don't demand. They simply grow, slowly, in their own time, and in the quiet, they teach us how to live." And I felt a warmth in my chest, the kind that comes from finally seeing something you have known deep down but never understood fully until the moment reveals it to you. And as we moved further into the garden, Elias showed me a small wooden bench tucked under a flowering tree, its surface wet from the rain, and he said, "Sit for a while. Listen. Let the garden speak to you." And I sat down, feeling the wet wood beneath me, feeling the gentle hum of life around me, the subtle movements of leaves, flowers, insects and small birds that had begun to appear after the storm, and for a long moment, I said nothing, simply letting my eyes and ears take it all in, feeling the rhythm of life here, slow but steady, resilient, persistent and gentle, and Elias sat across from me, watching with quiet patience, and I realized that patience was not just waiting, it was noticing, listening, understanding, allowing, feeling, and trusting that life moves in its own way, in its own time. And I thought back to the market, the river, the storm, and the bench by the field, and I saw a pattern forming. A quiet message repeating itself across different moments, and it became clear that the garden was teaching me that growth, understanding, and clarity do not come from rushing, from forcing, or from seeking immediate results, but from presence, attention, and the willingness to let things unfold naturally. And as I leaned back on the bench, taking a deep breath, feeling the earthy smell of wet soil and flowers rise to my nose, I realized that patience was not a passive state, it was active, alive, and full of gentle energy. And Elias smiled at me, reading my thoughts without a word, and said softly, "The world will always wait for those willing to be patient." The garden, the storm, the river, they all show this truth, over and over again, and I let his words sink into me, feeling their quiet strength, and I understood for the first time that life itself is a teacher, offering lessons in small moments, hidden spaces, quiet pauses, and patient waiting. And as I sat there, surrounded by the vibrant, tender life of the garden, I felt a calm certainty settle in me, a realization that the most important things, wisdom, understanding, clarity, peace, cannot be rushed or forced, but only allowed, noticed, and nurtured. And I knew then that this garden, this secret hidden place, was not just a space of flowers and earth, but a living lesson in patience, presence, and gentle attention. And I vowed quietly to carry this lesson with me, not just in words, but in the way I moved through the world, noticing, listening, allowing, and trusting the slow unfolding of life itself. I stayed on the bench for a long time, letting my eyes wander over every detail of the garden, noticing how the small flowers leaned toward the sunlight, how the leaves shimmered with the last drops of rain, how a tiny bird hopped along a branch, pausing as if to examine the world before it moved again. And with each quiet observation, I felt myself becoming more aware of my own breathing, my own heartbeat, my own presence in this small, alive world. And Elias sat silently across from me, like a patient guide who understood that lessons are not taught with words alone, but through observation, experience, and time. And after a while, he spoke softly, almost like a whisper. Patience is not just about waiting for things to happen. It's about noticing while you wait, appreciating the small things that are growing quietly, the small signs that show life moving in its own time. And I nodded, understanding more deeply than before, because so often I had confused patience with boredom or with helpless waiting. But now I saw that true patience is an active awareness, a careful listening, a gentle watching, a quiet recognition of life unfolding. And as I looked at the flowers again, I realized that every moment in life could be like this garden full of tiny, hidden wonders if only we slowed down enough to notice. And Elias smiled at me, reading my realization without interruption, and he said, "The world is full of hidden gardens, if you have the patience to find them. They are not always made of flowers and leaves. Sometimes they are moments, experiences, or people that teach you to pause, to breathe, to see." And his words resonated in me like the echo of the storm's lesson, like the calm river after the market's excitement. And I realized that my whole morning had been a journey through hidden gardens, each one offering a small but powerful truth about presence, attention, patience, and life itself, and I felt a gentle warmth in my chest, a quiet energy, a sense that I was growing in a new way, not visible to anyone else, but deeply present inside me, and I breathed in slowly, smelling the damp earth and fresh blooms, feeling the cool breeze move softly through the garden, and I understood that patience is a gift we give ourselves, a permission to let life unfold at its own pace, to witness without pushing, to allow without forcing, and Elias said softly, "It is easy to forget this in the rush of life. We move so quickly, always seeking, always chasing, always wanting results immediately, but the garden teaches us that growth cannot be hurried, and clarity, understanding, and peace come in their own time," and I let his words sink in, feeling the calm certainty of truth, and I realized that the market, the river, the storm, and now this garden were all teachers in different forms, each one leading me toward the same essential lesson, to be present, to notice, to allow, and to trust. And as I sat on the bench, I thought about the small buds in the garden that had yet to bloom, and I saw a reflection of my own life, full of potential, slowly growing, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the care, patience, and attention that would allow it to blossom fully, and I felt a quiet gratitude, not just for this garden, but for every small lesson I had experienced that morning, and Elias finally stood, stretching slightly, and said, "Come, it is time to leave. The garden has given its lesson. Remember it," and I rose from the bench, feeling the wet would give slightly under my weight, and we walked slowly back through the narrow path of vines and leaves, leaving the hidden garden behind us, and I carried with me the quiet certainty that patience is not passive. It is active, alive, and full of gentle wisdom, and that the most meaningful moments in life often grow hidden, waiting for us to slow down enough, to notice, and to allow them to reveal their truth in their own time. Thank you so much for joining today's lesson here at Mr. English Lab. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below telling me what you want to learn next. Your support helps the channel grow and helps me create more lessons for you. Take care, keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next class.